Welcome to another episode of the Software Modernisation podcast, episode 8. And we have a special guest today, Fabio, and we'll introduce ourselves in a second. So I'm Sam, software craftsperson at Codurance. Next up, let's go, Christina.
Hey, thanks for having me again. Yeah, it's Christina. I'm also a software craftsperson at Codurance.
Excellent. Francesco.
Hello, I'm Francesco. I'm a software craftsperson at Codurance as well. Very happy to see Fabio here.
Yeah, last but not least, Fabio, our special guest. Welcome.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I would like to say, like we say in Italy, idem win potato, which it means I'm also a software craftsman in Codurance. And I'm very happy to be here to share some story. I hope they are interesting for you and can vehicle some nice message around how we work in the company and what we do for clients. So thanks for having me.
No worries, we're happy to have you. So I guess let's jump straight into it, Fabio. Just give us like a bit of context around the work, what you did.
Sure.
We'll sort of dig into it as we go.
Okay, so the idea of this talk today is to give you some set the stage, okay, to give you some context about the problems that we had in the past for a client and how we overcome this problem, and actually pretty proud of the results. And so I'm going to share this story. This client is in, of course, one like of the thousands in the health industry. So like companies that create software for health. So pretty interesting market, at least a market where I feel very happy to work with because it's for the people, right? For the health. So it's very nice. I really love this kind of goal, let's say, while working. And as we all know, probably health, of course, is a very heavily regulated industry. Okay, so thanks God it is. And there is no exception when it comes to software for health industry as well. And this client is well known in the United States and is one of the major vendor for electronic medical record. Essentially, probably we already said that in their episode, but briefly, essentially, when we go to our GP, when we go to hospital, right, we are in the modern world. We don't use fax, and well, maybe someone still use, but the majority, at least in the United States, we have this software that doctors, nurses, they use to record the health and all the information about this for patients. In this way, patient can also look at those information when they are at home, etc. So this is more or less the context. So this company at that point in time needed to comply to a new regulation. Now let's skip the details because, to be honest with you, I might not remember exact which regulation, but that's not the point. The point is that, of course, these software are legacy, so they might be created long time ago. It's not an e-commerce that is created in the last minute. Is a very big piece of software, very legacy. A lot of people work on it, and it's the main driver of revenue for this kind of company, right? And therefore, the needs of this company was to make their electronic medical records software compliant with a new standard, okay? Because as you can imagine, in this market, there are a lot of standards, a lot of regulation that company needs to comply. There is no way to escape this. If you want to keep selling your product, you need to comply. And this is a very good thing, right? Because as I said, regulation, especially for health, are very important. Therefore, we had I would say, pretty tight deadline in which we should have taken our main product and make sure that this product was compliant to this regulation. And this regulation, it's one of the many that exist. It's called FHIR, similar to fire, but with an H. I'm not English native, but FHIR, that stands for fast, healthcare interoperability resource. And without boring you with the details, essentially, as you probably can guess, nowadays we have smartwatch, we use smartphone on a daily basis, and we want to look at our information, right, at our health information. And therefore, this protocol is aiming to make those, let's say, software that holds all this information to exchange this kind of information in a safe way, in a standard way, in an easy way, with modern technologies. Because, of course, in the past has been attempt to do this, but obviously nowadays we have some basic choice where we need to exchange information, for example, using REST, JSON, and all this kind of, I would say, normal day-to-day technologies that are used more or less for everything, okay? So that's to set the stage. We needed to make this software compliant with this new regulation, these new standards. And we did that in a very interesting way. So I don't know if you guys have any question or if I didn't explain something.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much, Fabio. I mean, I guess the obvious question is fire. I mean, fire is an interesting choice for something in healthcare. Usually fire is something you stay away from, but yeah, no, that's awesome. Awesome for setting the stage. Yeah, we can get into the details unless Christina or Francesco have any questions.
Well, not a question, but an observation. That you would think that in a regulated environment, there's a tendency for software to not change, and this is not actually true. Like because regulation change over time, laws changes, and there's new standard to adhere to. Even regulated software has to have the ability to change, and so it being legacy becomes an obstacle to continue to do business, which is
yeah.
Like it's different from like how I tended to imagine this kind of software before I encountered it, where I was imagining like very old systems that are like super legacy and nobody's touching them, and that's not actually true. And that was surprising when I learned about it.
No, yeah, that's a good observation, because in the end of the day, when we are craftsmen, we like writing code, but then we always need to remember that in the end of the day, health and software in health market is not like an e-commerce, okay? It's not like a landscape in which we release every day features, we release things, because of course here, all of those things needs to be well validated, right? Because it's like an error here can cost life, okay? So I think this is a perspective that also, before I joined this type of, let's say, project and market, I also thought, oh, okay, health is very slow, is very behind, but then actually stepping in, I realized that there is a reason for this. And the reason is that you don't deploy one of the software every week, every day, like it's very different, you know? And actually here, as you said, regulation and all these kind of things, they enforce those changes, right? And then if you are in a good situation, then you can easily embrace those changes. And if you are not in a good situation, then it's going to be difficult. I mean, pretty obvious statement, but yeah, that's how it is. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
I guess you said, Fabio, that there's a tight deadline as well. I guess the cost, we'd have to get into specifics, but I guess the cost is quite high of not meeting this deadline as well, right?
No, definitely, because as I said, if you have to do something by a specific date, and then you cannot get the certification, or allow me to say, like, yeah, I think it was actually a certification, because I think here we are dealing with ISO and all these kind of things. So then you cannot actually really sell your product. So it's really a business risk, okay? So it's pretty huge. So it's not just a deadline that is like someone waking up and say, okay, I want this feature by that day because just because. It's because it can be a harm to your business, to your ability to grow, to your ability, because of course, like those companies, they, even though they might not deploy every day, but they behind the scenes, they keep adding feature. they keep looking at the market to see what the trends are. So they try to be up to date, with the world. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks, Fabio.
Yeah. Okay, well, if there is any other specific question, I can just give you some idea of how we achieved that. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So there are different regulation around software, health software, like the famous EAC 62304, which it go through the requirements at a software level, which again, this is a bit maybe not interesting to go in details. But then the reason why I'm mentioning this is because on top of the famous 62304 that I'm sure you guys heard, probably you guys even talked about it in previous podcasts. On top of this, in this case, and that's why I'm quoting it, there is another sort of regulation or standards called 82304, okay? And the interesting things of this is that in the input, there are the custom requirement. So let's say the system specification, right? And then in order to get being certified, okay, you need to have the system and the device validated. So, let's remember these two things, like custom requirements and system device validated. And essentially what we had in first place, it was a specification, of course, wrote by the product owner, the people that knows the business within the company, right? Of the customer requirements. So for example, fire, for instance, is identified as a collection of resource. Okay, so a resource can be Sam, those are your medication, and that's a resource. Christina, those are your immunization. Okay, so all of these typical piece of IMR in fire are resource. Okay. And therefore, like the certification is all about, if I'm asking for the medication of Sam, then in output, I need to have the medication. Okay, so like it's heavily, there are very specific requirements in input, and the validation needs to be done in output to be sure that it's compliant to this specific format that I was mentioning. So there needs to be JSON, et cetera, okay? And I think the nice things we achieved here is that, as I said, in input, we had the client that gave us all this specification, that in the end of the day was just their own medical domain translated into what needed to be for fire, okay? But then in output, there was a tool that was like not owned by the company, but it is a tool that is made available in the community and is used by the, I don't know the English terms, the certifier, the certificator, I don't know, but essentially this tool, it's, if you are curious, is called Inferno, which it's interesting because fire is fire, Inferno, it's, I don't know, it's burning, everything is burning. But essentially this tool is the one that has been used to assess that actually we met the standards, okay? And therefore our let's say vision, intuition was, okay, we have a specification that is a Word document at the end of the day. How are we sure that we will drive the implementation properly? Like, what can we use in order to drive the implementation and be sure that in the end, what is requested in input is okay in the output and is also matching all the requirements of the fire standard, JSON, and so forth and so on. The idea here has been that we tried to make the documentation executable, okay? So someone probably will refer to this as a specification by example. I'm not sure if I'm saying something wrong, but essentially we made that specification actionable. How? Well, the how is that we used a pretty known framework that you might have heard. It's Cucumber. And we tried to put down all the scenario, all the requirement in this very high level business oriented way of doing. So was not really super tied to the details, but was also not fully business. Was a balance between be able to assess the output that still is kind of technical, of course, but then in the same time talk about the business, so the resource. So for instance, to give you a pretty example, given Fabio born in this date, given the medication for Fabio for that specific encounter, then I'm going to have this medication. Okay, so this level of details. Okay, and then we used those specification actionable to drive our low-level implementation. So essentially, the cycle was we write this together with the QA engineers, and then we make those things executable. And when these things will be executable and they pass, they are green, this means that, you know, the feature is implemented. So let's say we can see those tests as the outside loop of this process. Okay, and then of course the inside loop was more for the developers to make sure we were working in a proper way, doing the proper design. But the idea is that these tests were, when they were passing, they were a way to say, okay, here the output is coherent with the specification. Okay.
So would it be fair to say, Fabio, that this approach that you're mentioning was quite new as well for the organization? The approach of having this specification, for example, etc.
Yeah, definitely, because actually this for us was a client we had already history with, so it was not like the first project. So we were already in the context of the client, we already knew the client, and we actually tried to apply this for a different format. But the interesting thing there is that the previous format we worked for didn't have any formal specification. So this was the big difference. So here, I really saw the power of having a concrete specification written in the stone, and then use this to drive everything. And I think one point I want to highlight in all of this is that is when you have a specification, is not that you receive the specification, you straight away start and that's it. But actually, the specification helped for multiple things. First of all, we uncovered a lot of bugs, only specification, because we were discussing the PO and telling, okay, here there is this, but are we sure that this is correct? Oh, no, you're right, this is not correct. So in this way, we removed a future bug, because of course, if this was go through, then, and in the same time, this also helped the QA engineer to know how to test, okay? Because like it was more of a, I would say, a Tre Amigo session every time, every day. So it was always the QA engineer, us developer, the business stakeholder. So it was a really nice flow that allowed us to find a lot of problems while we were doing this. Like edge cases that no one thought about, things that were take for granted, but actually needed to be explicit. So, you know, this process really helped us in avoid a lot of future bugs. Really, that's the simplest thing I can say.
And I guess it must have saved quite a bit of time as well, that feedback loop. You know, the fact that you could, I mean, obviously there's, as you mentioned, you have the Tre Amigo sessions. There's like a time period spent on getting these specifications running against the code. But once you've got that working, then you can run them on demand, run them at various different points in your software development lifecycle. And that must save a lot of time and money, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think here one takeaway from this approach is that if we would have only implemented the ability for this software to exchange the information and then we would have just used the tools that the certificator was using to test, we wouldn't be able to actually verify the quality of the data, because these Inferno tools I'm referring is not identifying if, for example, if given paracetamol, you are receiving paracetamol. Maybe you are expecting a paracetamol and you receive a paracetamol, you know what I mean? Like this tool was not assessing the quality of the data, was just assessing that, let's say, the output was compliant to JSON and to some specific requirement of this standard. While the kind of testing we have done, actually, it was really, the granularity was really high, because we were able to not only assess on the output in terms of the structure, but also on the quality of the data. So if we are expecting 100 grams of paracetamol, with those kind of tests, we could verify that it's 100 grams and not 150 grams. Those kind of things cannot be tested within those certification tool. I don't know if you see the point.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this Inferno tool is more like a static analysis. It doesn't conform to certain rules, whereas you in your test that you implemented, you were actually able to assess the quality of the actual data, and the fact that traveling between various different systems, it was actually getting to the right place in the right format, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, I heard it classified as the invariant and variance of the format. That you can only test the invariants with a tool like Inferno, which are the thing that will be true for every document of that kind that is correct. But yeah, you cannot test the actual data that is specific to that customer, that client, that document in particular.
Exactly.
But I have a question for
Yeah.
something that you said before. You said that this was not the first time that you were using Cucumber in this client, and you said that there was a revelation, like that came from a different way of using it.
Yeah.
And you said something about having a specification sort of written in stone. Can you explain how it was used differently this time from the previous one?
Well, I
And
guess,
like how that difference like was valuable.
yeah, because whenever there is some certification, sorry, not some certification, some specification, the fact that there is something to discuss on, something to hold yourself onto and generate discussion is something that it really helps the understanding, because whenever there is no written specification and there are just supposition or go into UI to see where this data is, or, you know, it's all in the world of supposition or knowledge that maybe one person has and the other has it differently, right? So it's really, here it's a domain issue, I would say, in the sense that whenever there is something defined with a language that we all understand, you know, because a medication is a medication, doesn't matter if it's in fire or whatever it is. This really allows us to exchange information in a safe way, okay? And not relying on talks or exploratory testing of the UI. So here it was very, let me say, chirurgical, because, and even though it, by the way, even though it was chirurgical, we still uncovered a lot of issue. But this is, I think, the value. The value is that because it was written in the stone and because we were reasoning every day and having those discussions on a daily basis. And as far as I remember, probably this was different in the past, because in the past, when we worked on a different stanzas, we didn't have that. It was more gathering information from, I mean, of course, now let's not go there, but I think the difference I've personally experienced in this experience is okay. The experience I've done in this instance with Fire, it was that there was really something written, and therefore you can constantly refer and criticize and love and hate, you know what I mean? Like it is something that really helped, because I feel that if that thing was not there, we didn't have any specification, then would have been very difficult because, for example, fire, even though the concepts are the same, they have really different way of expressing the same concept. So we really needed a translation between the company domain way of doing things and actually this new requirement, because even though the data are the same, the format might change, but the way of they are expressed, it was very difficult sometimes. So I cannot imagine I've done that without something like this. I don't know if this answers your question, but
yeah, if I understand, like you elevated the Cucumber from being just validation to actually be the medium of the conversation with the stakeholder and the QA. So you've done like Three Amigos as it's supposed to be done, where you first agree on the specification and then the development of the product becomes sort of a secondary thing. Like the important thing you agree on the specification,
yeah,
and then you develop the product as a consequence of that.
no, definitely.
So, and you said that, so well, then I guess like my next question is, what made it possible to achieve that, right? So before you were using Cucumber and it was just validation at the end of the process, and you managed instead to make Cucumber sort of the centerpiece. How did you do that? Like, what were the conditions that made it possible?
The condition that made it possible, it was, to be honest, I fully think that is the constant relation with the business. And this is something that I really advise to anyone that writes software. Like the more you interact with the stakeholder, with the business, the better it is. Like when there is a constant flow, when there is a short feedback loop, that's the key. If there isn't communication, if there isn't constant flow of information, etc., if it's very siloed, like, okay, give me the specification and then we talk in a month, this doesn't work. Here you really need, and believe me, this is not easy. Like me and my teammates and the QAs and like we in this instance, we were having 2 product owners working with us, okay, not only 1. So it was stressful. It was every day. It was every day discussing, blah, 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 blah. But I think this is where the magic happened. Like without this, and actually, let me introduce a further element to the discussion, because I don't like when I talk about something to give the impression, oh yeah, we are the best, we did the best. No, we also did something that was not probably on the book. That was something that probably you don't do. Sorry, a fever. Essentially, these cucumbers, unfortunately, we didn't had the time and the capability to make them completely automated. And what I mean by this, I mean that unfortunately, this point in time, compared to the past that actually we did it, our cucumber were they needed a manual setup of the environment to be able to run. Okay, which obviously you might say, okay, then what are we talking here about? But I'm sharing this information just to show you that in the end of the day, for me, you can try to innovate even if you don't do things from the book, because of course here probably a purist of BDD or Cucumber will say, no, but that's wrong. How come you need manual setup, then you need to run those things? Like, okay, of course, we all know this, but in this context, given the time frame, given all the constraints we had, it was the case. So the QA engineer needed to do some sort of manual setup on the environment, and this has its own problem. But still, even though we had, let's say, this I don't know how to say, like this, not best practices, still we managed to deliver everything on time, pass the certification, and without a single bug or anything. Like, so here, what I'm trying to convey is that sometimes you cannot do things by the book for different reasons. And this is something I'm also proud of, because anyway, we tried something new and it worked. While the interesting was that in the past, same client, same Cucumber, we actually managed to have a full automated Cucumber. So the QA was pressing a button, the framework was already preparing all the data setup and everything, and then there was the verification. In this case, sorry to spoil you guys, we are not the best in everything. In this case, that's what happened. Like, we add a manual step. So, yeah.
Sorry, go,
Oh, no, you go, Sam.
I was just going to say, like, this is great to sort of see. It's a great example, I think, of sort of persevering and finding a way forward. And what you had, even though it may be in an ideal world wasn't exactly where you'd want it, it's much better than not having it at all. So it's like a step forward, if you see what I mean. I think it's great that, you know, a great show of pragmatism as well, in that at the end of the day, the primary thing is you want to meet this deadline and you want to do it the best way possible. And in this, and when you consider the whole context, this was the best way possible that you guys decided to go for, and worked continuously with the QAs, etc., to forge this solution. I'm sure did actually save a lot of time. If you'd like ran numbers or whatever, I'm sure you would have found that it did actually save a lot of time, even though it was, you know, partially manual.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just to give you some number, and this number doesn't come from my head, but comes actually from the client and talking to the QA engineer, that typically doing everything manual versus using even a not full automated solution, we can pass from something like 17 hours of a couple of hours of saving time. So, and that's not the number I'm telling you, it's the number they told me. So here, one thing is to do a manual setup that, okay, it can be complex, can be tied to environments, but then all the return of investment that you have by the automatic verification, to me, this is the ROI, the high ROI, the return of investment, because as I said here, the difference between verify everything manual and just to give you some insight, when we are testing those things, we are not saying, okay, given the medication of Sam, there is paracetamol. Here we are testing very complex situation, you know, given medication, given allergies, given immunization, like it's a huge amount of things. So imagine to verify manually all of those things is a lot. So I still believe that, as I said, I will repeat myself, but was not perfect for sure, but allowed us to be on time, because now this is legacy for them. Now, if one day these tests fail, it's a clear indication that something's gone wrong somewhere. And because of course we have the Cucumber, we also have all our layer of unit testing, integration testing, and everything, you know, like that's what we do here. So like it's for the future, like whenever it's going to be one of these Cucumber tests not passing, then they know where to look.
Yeah, that makes sense. Christina, apologies, we had a clash earlier on.
Yeah. I think you kind of touched on pretty much what I was going to say, but I think it's interesting the pragmatic kind of choice to go ahead with you know, with the manual setup and all of that, which you know, it's not obviously the gold standard, which you know you could just say go off and let the test do their own thing, but I think ultimately, you know, depending variances of complexity, sometimes it's not possible, and you could, especially with a tight deadline, spend a lot of time doing that setup, when really I think you spent the time quite valuably, and especially much more in like that specification, those conversations with the business and making sure that what you were doing was tailored exactly to their needs, rather than, you know, being able to build the greatest test suite. You ended up building a very good test suite that was very specific to the needs of the client.
Yeah, I cannot agree more.
I have a question lead on from that actually. How did you convince them to work this way? Because we covered it a bit with some of the questions Francesco asked earlier, but it's quite different from the way the client was used to working, right? In this particular instance. So how did you convince them that this was the best way to go? Also, given the fact that there was this reasonably tight deadline, how did you convince them that this was the best path?
Well, I guess here, I think they saw that when we used this kind of approach also for the previous work we have done, they saw how much time they saved, to be honest. So at least as far as I can remember, because now 4 or 5 months are past, so my memory is not fresh, but if I look back in my memory, I don't remember any further pushing in try to convince, because here, without this, I cannot imagine how would you do these things in such a short amount of time, especially because, as I said in the beginning, this fire has a shit ton, and okay, maybe shit is not appropriate, but in Spanish they say montón, means a lot of resource to validate. Okay, and also this is a point actually now I'm thinking I haven't shared. The problem is that before we had access to actually run by ourselves this Inferno thing, we didn't have anything. So we were in a position in which we can say, okay, now we do a little bit, then we use this Inferno and we check. Not at all. So if there was no Cucumber here, we would have been in the dark, because we would have been really waterfally doing all the job. Then the day of the certification, yeah, let's run Inferno, let's see what happens, right? So because for circumstances, we started this project, and then around us, all the infrastructure has been slowly created. And by infrastructure, I mean, of course, now details are not interesting, but like all the security aspect, because as you might imagine, guys, we also shared kind of the same context and clients. When you are dealing with an electronic medical health system, is not a system in which there are API exposed. You call the API, you get your data. It's not an e-commerce, right? I mean, it's a very closed system, of course, for different reasons that now is not worth investigating, but it's a closed system. So close, not cloud, close. And it's not that easy. It's not that you say, okay, I'm going to create a bunch of delivery mechanism around and that's it. Like there is a lot of concern, security, like there is a lot. So we haven't had all of this almost until the end. So, if we didn't have a specification written, if we didn't have a Cucumber, we might have done all the work, then run the tools. Oh, this is wrong after months. So, yeah.
That makes sense. And it's really interesting how you said that you sort of built up upon the capital that you had already sort of had from the previous project as well. So you didn't need to prove certain things, certain techniques and stuff carried over because they'd already seen the value of it. And it was just like, it wasn't even a conversation. It was just, yep, you're going to work exactly the same way because it worked really well, as you said, and saved lots of time and money. But yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
Fabio, really interesting.
And indeed, okay, where go, Francesco?
I was just saying that it is particularly interesting that you highlight the value of fast feedback in a situation where there is regulatory compliance to be had. So in a regulated environment, regulated industries, you have a project and then you have like this external specification to adhere to certify, and you would think that you would tend toward I think a waterfall approach, where it's like, this is the specification, we can do the entire project and just check at the end. And you highlight the fact that actually, well, you still want fast feedback to know that you're working toward it in reality, rather than finding out at the end that you misinterpret something. That's like the relationship between agile and compliance is, I think, never easy. But it's but there's something to be gained from making the two work together.
Yeah, no, definitely. As I said, I'm pretty happy of the result, and I would do it again. Of course, we did an exercise to retrospect and see what could have been different. And for example, because we are talking for quite some time, but my last thoughts on this could be even to short the feedback even more. How? By having the first day the availability to run against Inferno. So if we would have able from day 0 to do a little piece of work, pass it through the Inferno tools, we would have been even in a better position. But you know, the world is not ideal. There are a lot of variables in the game, a lot of companies, a lot of contractors, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of people. So it's not always like in the books. But definitely, if someone comes and asks me, Fabio, what do you suggest to someone that is trying to make her own legacy compliant with the regulation? I would say first things first, make available the tool that you will use to validate from day 0. That's my suggestion.
To build on what you said, that sounds like the mindset was very much validation. I know you said that again, if you from day 0, you would like to have had access to that tool and from the very beginning. But I think it's super interesting that it sounds like the team's mindset was you know, specification, etc., from the very beginning, from the outset, which then sort of guided your whole approach. And as you said, the conversations were around the specification. It all stemmed from there. I think Francesco said earlier on that it was sort of you made that at the core, you know, of everything, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah, because in the end, the people working in this process, and by people I mean the QA engineer, they learned how to test. They learned how to use Cucumber. They learned how to use Git. They learned how to communicate better. So there are so many aspects in all of this. And yeah, I think they will miss all of this if they don't push for it, they don't own, because the alternative to this is to go manual. There is no easy solution.
My biggest takeaway, I think, here is sort of like that relationship that you built with the business, that joinedness between the developers and the business themselves. And it seems like you chose the right tool set to sort of like enable that relationship and be able to build everything specifically how they wanted it. And I think it's amazing that obviously you had built on prior experience, and you know, your prior engagements with your client meant that you already had that relationship in advance. And I wonder if there's a good starting point for fostering those kind of relationships with clients, really.
Yeah, I feel that it's important to move away from technologies and details and actually go close to the business. That's the first things I would suggest. Like if you end up with a very huge client in which there is a lot of history, a lot of years, knowledge is the problem. And how you share knowledge, how you modify the knowledge is all about the knowledge. So we should move the focus from how we do things, that typically is always the main focus of software developers, to, okay, what is the business needs here? And try to move the focus to go before there to the business and the relation with the business stakeholder. And then after you really make this connection with those people and you understand the needs that they have, then, okay, you move to the details, to to everything that we do. But the first step is to really try to understand the problem they have, because to me, software problem are just a consequence of business problem that someone didn't understand properly, right? So the more we understand the business, the high chance we have to make less mistake because in the end, as a developers, what we do, we observe the reality, right? And problems in the reality, and then we try to translate this in a model in the software. So the challenge is, the more we understand the business, the less mistake we might do. Of course, doesn't exist software free from mistakes, but at least exists software that reflects the business needs. Yeah. So I think that's the most important things to me. And with this philosophical note, I guess we can wrap up, unless you don't have any other questions or any point.
I mean, thank you very much, Fabio. I mean, my closing thoughts really are just the constant communication that you said you had in this close relationship, and building, as Christina said, on the trust that you already had. I think really contributed to the great results that you said. I mean, and to be honest, coming out of doing something, whether it be a pet project or whatever, to be able to say that you would do something very similar to what you had done, or obviously considering a different context, etc., is always a good sign. Then, do you know what, it completely didn't work, and I never want to do anything even remotely similar. So yeah, that's fantastic to hear. Francesco, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I said like some of that already, but maybe it's worth reiterating. Compliance, like heavily regulated industries, and a working approach based on collaboration and quick feedback, I think it's a valuable lesson. And as Fabio said, let's hope that we can get to apply this again, see if it works again, and and go for it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fabio, for taking the time to take us through, albeit, I guess, on a higher level. We could have, I'm sure, dived very, very deep into the technical details, but that was really interesting. Yeah, hopefully our audience will enjoy it. So yeah, thank you very much. And for anyone listening, watching, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And see you next time for episode 9. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, guys. Have a nice,
Thanks so much, Fabio.
hot day. Bye.
Bye.
Inferno.
Thank you.